Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Chag Sukkot Sameach. I wanted to go over a few things about the so-called Innocence of Muslims movie, the Muhammad movie, as some people are calling it. First of all, I would like to say, as I pull up a website here, I would like to say that the video is not intended to be any sort of serious discussion. Anybody who says that it is intended to do that and simply hasn't watched it, or they're not being honest. It's to even call it polemic is really giving it too much credit. It makes Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh look academic. It's not to say that we shouldn't engage in debate and discussion about the issues raised in it. But it's certainly not trying to do that. It's trying to incite and infuriate the Muslim world. Now, let me turn this around. You can see, we're here in the Sukkah Command Center on the first day of Sukkot. You can see here on the Hashlama website, HASHLAMAH.org. You can see that there are a few articles posted, and one of them is why the Muslim world is so sensitive when it comes to Muhammad. And it's just simply text, and this website is actually being reformatted for the purposes of the Hashlama Project study circles. So this is sort of the temporary website that's housing some of these articles, while Michael from the Hashlama Atlanta chapter is constructing that. What you can see in the article, why the Muslim world is so sensitive when it comes to Muhammad, is a discussion about what's really going on when the West is attacking Muhammad, and how it's somewhat a coded way of attacking the Arab world and Muslims in particular. But go ahead and check that out when you get a chance. What I want to point out, is that while that's a discussion, a serious discussion of what's going on in terms of why a video like that would be created, the video itself is not trying to have a serious conversation. We should and we could have a discussion of some of the issues raised in it. But before we do that, we should really ask ourselves, what sources are we accepting as historical, and why? If one is a Muslim, then chances are they believe some sources, they don't believe other sources, and ultimately, at least on paper, one should be giving the ultimate authority to the Quran, rather than to things that were written, 150 to 200 to 250 to even more years after Muhammad. Sometimes that doesn't always pan out that way, and Joseph Schacht, in fact, makes a compelling argument for why that doesn't always pan out that way, and at what point in history it stopped panning out that way. But that's a discussion unto itself. The issue is that the people who made the movie are not Muslims. They don't believe the Muslim sources, and yet strangely they've given preeminence of the much later sources over the Quran itself. So imagine if we only had passing references to President Abraham Lincoln for years and years and years, just passing references. And in fact, most of our references to him were from other countries, writing about him, writing about the Civil War, so on and so forth. We didn't get the first biography of him written, first biography at all, written by an American, until after 9/11, 2001. Nobody would take that seriously from a historical perspective or as a historian. It'd seem ridiculous, and yet that's what we're doing when we accept these stories that are promoted as historical throughout that video, The Innocence of the Muslims. So, let me give an example as we turn this around here once again. So, this lady, she's really upset. Her daughter, she thinks, is going to be given away to a child molester. Here we go. This guy, he's grouchy. He's having a bad day. White Jesus there, I guess, is Muhammad. Okay.
Is your Muhammad a child molester? Our daughter's been a child, and he's 55 years old. He's 53, not 55.
Okay, 53, not 55. I hope you could hear that, but if you couldn't, blame it on the fact that I'm recording this in my temporary dwelling during Chag Sukkot. But in any event, he's purporting that his daughter will have the stars. He's going to marry her to Muhammad, blah, blah, blah. And her mom, she's really upset. And she says, is your Muhammad a child molester? And she's but a child, and he's a man of 55. The guy then says, no, he's 53. Well, that's an attempt at comic relief for the, Pam Geller and Robert Spencer and people watching this movie, people who it's cheerleading to. You can imagine them kind of giving themselves a high five at the screening for this movie, were it actually a movie, and not a trailer to a, I guess, unfinished YouTube video. But the point is, she says 55, he says 53, and the creator of the movie is, where is the creator of the movie getting these numbers? They're getting these numbers from what's essentially the equivalent of the biography of Abraham Lincoln written after the World Trade Center fell. They're getting it from Ibn Ishaq's Sirah account. Now, the same thing. Let's go to the beginning, and then we'll say a little more about that. I'm not going to go through this whole stinking thing, but let's get all the way to the beginning of this thing. What's this guy have to say? I don't know if it's gonna. Let's see. Let's see. If I click ahead, it's kind of a buggy little video, to be honest. Here we go.
Wives, 11 at the same time. Even had a girlfriend. I know, I have heard about it. If my sick wife.
Okay. He says Muhammad had 60-some wives, 11 of them at the same time. He even had a girlfriend. Where's he getting this stuff, He's getting it from, again, these late materials. The roof came off. It's gotten a little windy. I'm going to have to fix that in a minute. So where's he getting that from? He's getting that from these late sources. These late sources are telling the story about a guy who the Quran says very little about. The Quran's not telling you Muhammad had X amount of wives or anything like that. And in fact, like I said, it says very, very little about him. So what happens is, centuries later, you have rulers like the Abbasid Caliphate and people who didn't like Jews, and you start seeing these stories emerge that say very unfavorable things about Jews and attribute it to Muhammad. You also then get stories by these rulers who want to have a bunch of wives that, well, there were exceptions, and for Muhammad, he had 11 wives or whatever. But again, you don't see this in the Quran, you don't see it in anything early, you see it later. And from a historical critical perspective, this indicates that there's somebody later who's either fabricating these for themselves or being commissioned to fabricate these, perhaps by a political entity. either way, it doesn't suffice as historical evidence. So I would caution the viewer, the listener, to, if they're going to watch this movie, to firmly establish what their criteria are going to be for what sources they're going to accept as true and what they're going to reject as fabricated, because they can't simply say uh, that they're going to pick and choose. They've got to come up with some criteria. Now, the Muslim world has come up with a criteria. They've decided we're going to grade things by authenticity of a hadith, and that doesn't apply to a lot of things. For instance, the story of the Banu Qurayza in the Sirah account of Ibn Ishaq. This is not an issue where isnad pertains. So a lot of these things are instantly thrown out anyway by the Muslim world, or only accepted by a very small fanatical faction, because they don't even meet, in many cases, the Muslim world's criteria for authenticity. But from a historical critical perspective, it's even more stringent, because we don't simply pick and choose based on who says that they heard from so-and-so, or who says that they heard that so-and-so heard from so-and-so heard from so-and-so. As I mentioned, Joseph Schacht, he indicates that as the isnad was the more perfect asanid were developed, we start seeing more and more ahadith with those perfect asanid. So what that indicates to a scholar, to a historical critical scholar, is that ahadith were being fabricated with fabricated asanid, with fabricated chains of narration. And so it doesn't put us in any better of a standing to just look at who purportedly narrated them, because that could have been fabricated too. Instead, what we have to do is we have to look using historical critical methodologies at probable motives for bias. We have to look at what was going on politically, socio-politically at the time that these hadith were first documented as existing. And, if we can, for instance, trace the story of the Banu Qurayza to having appeared right after the Isawiya or Isuniya uprising against the Abbasid Caliphate, then we see a motive not just for bias, but for concoction, for fabrication, for polemic. And then that explains why we don't see that story mentioned by Jewish sources ever before that. So these are the sorts of things that you have to ask yourself. You can't simply, if you're a fan of the video, the Innocence of Muslims video, you can't simply high-five each other, high-five Pam Geller, high-five Robert Spencer, and all these folks, and say, yeah, that's funny, he's 53 instead of 54. It's ridiculous, because this is not a discussion about historical sources when you're talking about that. It's a discussion about the details of a historical fiction written a century and a half plus after Muhammad. And if you're going to then use that as evidence against Muhammad, that's a little weird, especially if you are touting the virtues of Western scholastic methodology, and how enlightened and wise we are, and then you're going to accept every a source at face value like that without critiquing it, without scrutinizing it the way that we do with biblical sources or anything else. It's a little ironic, to say the least. Okay, well, that's all for now. What I would additionally like to once again direct your attention to is not this silly movie, but something a little more edifying. So again, the Hashlama Project study circles, as you see here, beneath it, where Judaism and Islam meet, co-worship, dialogue, and historical study of Jewish and Muslim interaction and cooperation. You can write to hashlama@gmail.com, HASHLAMAH@gmail.com, or go to hashlama.org, or you can find our chapter list there as well. We have numerous chapters from Australia to Iran, throughout the United States, and we have tentative chapters in North Africa and in Israel and elsewhere. So get with one of these Hashlama Project study circles start meeting together, Jews and Muslims getting together, discussing things like mature adults, praying together, worshiping together, chanting dhikr together, debating together, whatever, but acting like grown, civilized human beings. Okay, so with that plug mentioned, I'm going to go fix the roof.